Well, by now you've likely heard the news. Unfortunately, there was more crime on the plaza over the Labor Day weekend, and it has been a difficult summer down there when it comes to news that you don't want to have in the news cycle. Crime, restaurants deciding they got to shut down and close early on weekend nights. That was the Shake Shack story from earlier in the summer. But this most recent one, you had a 15-year-old allegedly shooting a 14-year-old. Thankfully, a non-life-threatening shooting. But still, I mean, that's the kind of stuff that obviously the plaza does not want, the city does not want, and, law enforcement doesn't want. Speaking of law enforcement, Kansas City, Missouri Police Chief Stacey Graves is joining us here on KCMO Talk Radio. Always appreciate her coming on the show. Good morning, Chief. Thanks for your time. Just broadly speaking, when it comes to some of the issues you've dealt with on the plaza this summer, how do you feel like the department as a whole has been dealing with that, and what do you want to be able to do more of in an ideal world?
Good morning. I would say that over the summer, obviously KCPD has responded. We initially had a large groups of juveniles in the summertime, at the beginning of the summer. We increased patrols down in and around that area, and it kind of curbed it. And when I say patrols, I'm just not just talking about like uniformed officers down there. We had our community engagement division down there contacting kids, contacting parents, handing out flyers for other events hosted by the city and our community engagement division to try to give kiddos another option instead of hanging out at the plaza. Obviously, we are going to continue to do that. This last weekend was an unfortunate incident, but it is indicative of the violent crime that we are seeing in our youth today.
Is it one of those things where when you look at that incident in particular, do you say to yourself, well, if we had more patrol, if we had a fully staffed department, I know you're down, 300 cops, I mean, that would maybe deter something like that? Is there something else that you think, too, that could help prevent something like that taking place?
Well, 100%. We are down 300 officers. The more resources, the more manpower we have, the better we are able to respond to various situations and put more officers in places for more preventative purposes. But this just kind of goes into that citywide approach to violent crime that I keep talking about. It's going to take everybody in Kansas City to try to curb some of this crime. We have a culture of violence in Kansas City. People are armed, to include our youth, and I feel like our youth are just doing what they see, too, amongst adults. This is just something that we need to start talking to our kids, get communities involved. I can tell you, KCPD is showing up. We are in all of these spaces and places. This weekend we were involved in, a neighborhood where Pat Clark had kids there. KCPD was there to interact with kids. We're trying to be in a lot of different spaces and places to try to build some of those relationships. We need our community to come out too, to come out and offer different types of solutions for kids. Because, sometimes we put up an event, kids aren't necessarily want to go hang out with a bunch of cops. I mean, we're cool. I mean, we're fun, but, that sometimes that's just not everybody's scene. So offering more opportunities for kids to hang out and in different spaces throughout the city to try to curb some of the, all kids grouping up in large areas. And then, there's going to be a couple kids who either have some kind of a conflict with each other. Again, then that goes into conflict resolution skills, or even outside of that, someone's trying to show out. And it just leads to an argument that leads to violence.
Kansas City Police Chief Stacey Graves is on KCMO. You mentioned being down to 300 cops. Obviously, that would help to get that number up. What, if anything, have you spoken to either the board about or the city council about in terms of how to, some type of mass recruitment? I know law enforcement around the country is struggling with recruitment right now. But has there been any outside-the-box ideas that has come from the board that you have proposed to them on how to try to close this gap? Because if not, we're going to be sitting here. You may be the police chief in 10 years. It could be somebody else. And I feel like the same conversation is going to be going on.
Right. I think this is a multi-layered situation. About 25 years ago, there was a huge push for hiring cops. Now we're getting into the latter part of those officers' careers. Mm-hmm. On top of that, we have had issues with our pay That's exactly why I'm on my way to Jeff City right now to be present at the ceremonial signing of SB 186, is where Jeff City and the legislators down there removed the pay scale cap for KCPD. So we are celebrating that today. And in that, one of the asks that I will be putting forth is to ensure that KCPD, which is the largest law enforcement agency in the state of Missouri and arguably in the region, to make sure that we have competitive starting pay and topping out for our officers. Is that necessarily something that is out of the box? No, but it's something that is definitely needed. We got to start with the basics here, and that is to be competitive.
So you're going down there. You're going to basically ask the state to help fund KCPD, or what does that mean when you say you're going to ask them to increase starting pay?
The board. No, I'm sorry, the Board of Police Commissioners. And that's going to be reflected in our budget request this year.
Gotcha.
And also, when you ask me questions about thinking outside the box, we do have a recruitment and retention committee that are looking at those things, like looking at different types of benefits that we could add for KCPD officers that isn't offered in the region or even in our local other cities that surround Kansas City. We are looking at innovative ways to try to retain officers, but at first we need to start with pay.
Mm-hmm. What about, you mentioned the push 25 years ago. I mean, you've been around this obviously your entire life. Is there anything you can think back to 25 years ago when there was a massive push to hire cops that was effective? I know the world is a very different place today than it was 25 years ago, but is there anything that applies that was successful then that allowed communities to hire law enforcement officers in a way that maybe they could apply to today?
Well, I think that was a different environment then. First off, this is a very difficult environment for law enforcement. There's been a lot of demoralizing of pleas of the profession. We have a little bit of a legitimacy crisis because of everything that's went on in our country over the past however many years. So I feel like a little bit of that we're reeling from that, and I think we need to start. I mean, I'm not trying to get too awful deep, but we need to start speaking life to people to let people know this is still a noble profession. This is a great job, and this is one way you can serve a community. And a lot of people, and especially this younger generation, that really want to have a cause, that really want to make a difference in this world. This is like walking the walk or walking the talk or whatever that is. I mean, this is the position for you. You have great benefits. You have great contacts. It's a family environment. It's really a rewarding career.
Have you, Chief Stacey Graves, when you have these conversations, whether it's with City Council, Board of Police Commissioners, anywhere else around town, do you feel like this is going to be one of those uphill battles that will take years to fix? Or do you say, hey, during my tenure as police chief, I think we can cut into getting it down to, let's say, being 100 officers off? I mean, do you have that number in mind, or do you just try to do it one day at a time?
I'm just trying to get as many quality candidates who have the courage and the compassion to serve Kansas City. I'm going to try to get as many of those people lined up and in careers at the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department, as many as we can. I would love for us to, I could set a goal, but my goal is to have fully staffed.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then last thing on the plaza to tie it all back to that conversation. Have you heard anything, whether it's complaints or others from owners down there, managers, anything like that, or has it been pretty quiet?
Our business community is frustrated. I would say that's even outside of Kansas City. When you have situations where, and I'll tell you what kind of like that goes down to, is the lack of a city jail. We haven't had a city jail since 2018. I know that there has been recent conversations about that between the city and Jackson County, and now it looks like it's the potential for the city of having a standalone city jail is probably what may play out. I don't know. I'm not in those behind the scenes conversations, but that's a need for our city. And I know that a lot of people don't like that idea, and I am not for mass incarceration, but I am for certainty of consequences.
It's a good way to put it. Stacey Graves on KCMO. Thank you so much for being here, Chief. Appreciate the time.
Thanks for having me.
You bet.